Okay, we're going to talk about photosynthesis, but before we do that, some introductory material. Um, of course, photosynthesis is the way that plants make food, and they take water and carbon dioxide and form oxygen and glucose, of course, is fuel. The type of organisms that carry out photosynthesis are plants and algae, in particular cyanobacteria, and some prokaryotes. Now here we can see what the chloroplast looks like, which is inside of a plant, and this is the structure that is where photosynthesis is going to occur. And there are pigments inside of chlorophyll, and this is right from the notes that I'm looking at, but the pigments are substances that have a color due to the selective absorption. In other words, they're chemical compounds, these pigments, that will reflect certain wavelengths of the visible light spectrum. So they take on the appearance then of the colors that these wavelengths represent. So for example, if a pigment reflects purple light, then the pigment will have the color purple. But what's more important about these pigments is what they absorb, the wavelengths of light that they do not reflect, that is the wavelengths of light that they absorb, because those are the wavelengths that are used for energy. And those are the wavelengths that biological organisms, in our case the plants, can use to carry out the process called photosynthesis. So in plants and algae and cyanobacteria, the pigments are the means by which the energy of the sunlight is captured for photosynthesis. But each pigment is going to react with only a narrow range of the visible light spectrum. So there's usually the need to produce several kinds of pigments in a plant, and each one is going to be a different color, okay? And by having several different types of pigments, they can absorb various wavelengths of light. For example, chlorophyll A, okay, which is one of the pigments, absorbs violet, blue, and red wavelengths of light. So these are the wavelengths then that are used in the process of photosynthesis, because these are the wavelengths that are absorbed, okay? Violet, blue, and red, okay? And they use then this energy to carry out the chemical process in which they produce glucose. Now, since they are going to absorb violet, blue, and red, chlorophyll A is going to reflect green, so it has the color green, okay? There's also something called chlorophyll B, and this is also green for the same reason. And there are other pigments called the carotenoids. The carotenoids do not absorb orange and yellow light, so they will take on those colors, okay? And these are the colors actually that these pigments are going to be in abundance during the fall and winter season, and that's why the leaves take on a yellow-orange color, because the carotenoids are what is most produced at that time. Okay, so the chloroplast then is the organelle in which photosynthesis takes place, and there are two different reactions in photosynthesis, the light and the dark. Okay, the light reactions, which we'll talk about first, are carried out on structures called the thylakoid membranes, okay? And the dark reactions are carried out in what's called the stroma. So if we take a look at this picture, which I will make a little bit larger now, you can see here, this is the chloroplast, and you can see these stacks, these disc-like structures. Each disc is called a thylakoid, okay? And in between and around the discs, you have what's called the stroma. So the light reactions actually take place on these discs. And a stack of these discs is given the name of a granum. Okay, so a whole stack, what we're seeing here, a stack of thylakoid membranes is called a granum. Okay, and so you can see here that the chloroplast has an outer membrane as well as an inner membrane. And then you have these discs, and in between you have the stroma, okay? So the The light reactions, again, are going to occur on the thylakoid membranes. And basically, the light energy and water are going to produce oxygen and two molecules that are really the energy storage molecules that will be later used in the dark reactions. And they are ATP and NADPH. So producing the ATP and the NADPH, which are chemical molecules, each one containing energy, this is what's produced in the light reactions, okay? This requires the sun's energy. And then they produce these chemicals, which then are used in the dark reactions, which will occur in the stroma. And the energy, the ATP and the NADPH, then will be involved with converting carbon dioxide to glucose. So the energy that is produced in the light reactions propels the dark reactions, which produce the glucose from carbon dioxide. What is the importance of the glucose? Well, it's a major source of energy for most of all the functions that all organisms carry out, and it is the primary source of energy that the brain uses. Just to divert a little bit, the first atmosphere on Earth, okay, which around 4 billion years ago only contained nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and water for the most part. So the first primitive microorganisms like bacteria and algae, which were the ancestors of the plant, the algae, okay, they began to use the carbon dioxide in the water to produce glucose and oxygen. Those were the products. So then with the availability of oxygen, as time passed, more advanced organisms evolved and were able to use the oxygen along with the glucose to then produce energy. So things started out without any oxygen and glucose. In fact, the reverse reaction of photosynthesis is called cellular respiration. So the forward direction of the reaction, okay, where we have 6 carbon dioxides, 6 waters, produce glucose and 6 oxygens. The reverse reaction, where you take the glucose and the oxygen, which is what we do, and we breathe out CO2 and we have the water. So that is called cellular respiration. Now, the leaves, where we find the chloroplasts, okay, there are some pores, okay, and these pores are called stoma, or the plural is stomata. And they're found in the leaf and also in stems and the epidermis, that is the skin of these structures, and they're used for gas exchange. And the pore, the stoma, is bordered by a pair of specialized cells known as guard cells. And these are responsible for regulating the size of the opening, in other words, the size of the pore. So air that contains carbon dioxide enters the plant through these openings, so it can be used for photosynthesis. The oxygen produced by photosynthesis in the leaf's interior exits through the same openings, okay? So there's these pores that are controlled by these surrounding cells called guard cells, okay? Also, water vapor is released into the atmosphere through these pores, and when plants release water, we don't call this sweating, but with plants, that's called transpiration, okay, transpiration. Okay, so now I want to just add a couple of other things. Okay, so here we have the picture of the chloroplast, and then I just want to over here. Here's a summary then of the light reactions. Okay, light energy plus water gives you oxygen, ATP, and NADPH. Okay, now we want to look at a little more detail as to what is going on on the thylakoid membranes, because it's a little complex. We'll see, but there is going to be 2 different systems, photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. And each one of these photosystems, we will see, let's look over here. Okay, let's, now I think I have to do a different screen share. I'm not sure if you're going to see this or not. I think you're looking at my dashboard, but I hope no, this is not going to be what's going on. Let's see. Okay, so with these pictures, I can show you what the photosystem looks like. Okay, so if you take a look here, you can see that this is in the disk, on the disk of the the thylakoid disc, we will find two photosystems. Each one looks like this. And we can see here that the structure is going to contain various components, each one of these photosystems. This is called an antenna assembly, and there's all these molecules here that are going to be absorbing the light from the sun, which is represented here by the photons. That's one of the ways that light travels in little packets of energy. And this area here is called the reaction center. This is actually the chlorophyll, okay? And this is where you're going to generate the oxygen by splitting water. And what's going to happen, as we will see in the following videos, is when the energy comes in, it's going to cause electrons to start bouncing around in these different pigment molecules, which are part of the antenna assembly. And eventually the electrons will jump over to the chlorophyll, which is the reaction center, and then the electron will be transferred over to what is called the acceptor molecule, which is right here in purple. Okay, so we'll see this in just a few moments. So again, we see same thing over here. The photons come in. Here's the antenna assembly. Then there's the reaction center, and then there is an acceptor. Okay, so that's what's being depicted here, and this will be explained much better in the upcoming videos. But let me just say that in the photosystems, there's photosystem 2 and there's photosystem 1. And photosystem 2, the photons of the light energy are captured by the chlorophyll A, and this causes the pigment to become energized. So the chlorophyll A becomes energized. So the electrons go to a higher energy state, and they jump around to an electron acceptor, okay, which we saw, and then they go through what is called the electron transport chain, or the ETC. Okay, and eventually these electrons will ride over to photosystem 1. Now, the electron transport chain of photosystem 2 also provides energy to drive what's called a proton pump. And this pump will move hydrogen ions from the stroma to the thylakoid membrane. At the same time that the water is oxidized, when chlorophyll A is energized, what happens then is the water will break up into an oxygen molecule, an O negative, and 2 protons. And then that O negative will combine with another O negative to form O2, or oxygen. And this will all be explained later on. So there's going to be sources to produce the protons inside the thylakoid membrane from this proton pump, and also the protons that are split from water. Now, photosystem 1, okay, is where the electrons will be arriving from photosystem 2. And there's different flows here. There's what's called the non-cyclic flow and the cyclic flow. And in both pathways, though, you're going to produce energy. Well, in the non-cyclic flow, the electrons are not reused, but they're taken up by a final receptor to form something called NADPH. And the electrons may go through the cyclic flow, the other one, and in this case, we'll see what happens in the video. But the whole point is that the protons want to go back to the outside, and what they do is, by doing so, they are going to go through something called an ATP synthase port, and that generates ATP. But all of that will be explained in the videos much better than I can. It's kind of difficult to visualize. But again, let's take a look at these pictures. We can see here the photosystem with the antenna assembly and the reaction center and the acceptor molecule. Okay, so the light energy is going to hit these molecules, electrons jumping around, and that's what really is the point of this whole thing. Okay, we're going to analyze the electron, what's called the electron transport chain. So here you're seeing exactly what is going to be on the thylakoid, this photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. The reason this is called 2 is because it was discovered first. But anyway, you can see that it's a whole movement of electrons, and as electrons are moving, you're going to get out ATP, and you're going to get out NADPH, and both of these are used in the dark reactions. Let's see what else we have here. This is just showing you the same thing. just a different drawing to depict the same business, but we see here the antenna assembly, the reaction center, the acceptor molecule, and so forth. And if there's anything else. So this is a nice picture to show you that this is one of the thylakoid membranes, and then on it you can see the antenna assembly, the different pigments, the chlorophyll, okay, and then the acceptor, okay. So the energy from the sun is going to cause electrons to be excited. They jump around, eventually arriving on the chlorophyll, and then they get to the electron acceptor. Okay, so that shows you all this is going on in the thylakoid membranes. Remember, this stack of them is called a granum. Okay, so this shows you the same thing here. What else do we have here? Same thing. Okay, all right. We will see this. This is showing you a little more detail about the antenna assembly. You can see this chlorophyll A, B, and the carotenoid. So many pigments are involved to capture the light energy as much as possible. And then the electrons are going to jump over to the reaction center of the chlorophyll, okay? Okay, we see how the electrons are moving over to the reaction center. And all of this, as I said, will be in the little videos that are coming up that are explained much better than I can. Okay, we'll stop here then with this.